So, you're getting ready to take your cell organelle test, and you need a little bit of help. Well, I thought we would do a couple of things today to kind of help you prepare for that. So I'm going to show you, first of all, the review activity that we did on the board, where we matched up the organelles with their structures. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll take you through an analogy of a cell and a factory, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is pause this. So here we see four different organelles. So take a moment and see if you can match them up correctly. Rigid outside structure helps to maintain the plant's shape and support. Cell walls are only found in plant cells. Now all cells have a cell membrane. The cell membrane surrounds the cell and regulates the flow of materials in and out through a process called osmosis. The cytoskeleton is a structure found inside of cells. It provides strength and support, helps the cell move, and plays an important role during cell reproduction, which we'll learn about later on. And all cells also contain this material called cytoplasm. It's the jelly-like fluid that's inside of cells that also includes the organelles that we see inside of a cell. So take a minute and see if you can match those up with the correct structures and functions. Now we could think of a cell as a protein building factory. And the little structures inside of the cell that do the protein building are called ribosomes. Ribosomes are little tiny structures that take information from the DNA of the cell and turn that into instructions that then tell them what proteins to build. Now, once the proteins are built, they need to be packaged and get ready for transport. That process is done by the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus processes and packages proteins to help transport them. Now, some ribosomes are free-floating ribosomes, and some ribosomes are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. In either case, the endoplasmic reticulum sometimes produces proteins with those ribosomes, but also transports them and takes them to the places where they need to be taken. So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is basically just a transport system that also can produce some lipids and is important for the production of cell membranes. The rough endoplasmic reticulum are the endoplasmic reticulum that have the ribosomes on them. And then finally, as materials need to be broken down, as cell parts break down, as food molecules need to be broken into parts so they can be used by the cell, that's the job of the lysosome. The lysosome is an enzyme-filled bag that then breaks things down. Now, the nucleus may arguably be the most important part of the cell. It is the part of the cell that tells it what to do and when to do it. Stored inside of the nucleus is the DNA, the instruction manual that tells the cell how to be a cell. And so the nucleus controls cell functions. Now, how is all of this powered? It's powered through a little bean-shaped organelle called the mitochondria. The mitochondria's job is to take oxygen and sugars, rip apart the sugars, and release the energy stored in it in the form of ATP so that the cell can use it. So the mitochondria releases energy stored in foods. Now, the last two structures are associated mostly with plant cells. Vacuoles are large storage containers that store water and nutrients and other materials for a cell. It's really essential for plant cells because a lot of a plant cell shape is dictated by the amount of water that's in its vacuoles. And the final structure also we find mostly in plants because those are the structures that carry out photosynthesis. A specialized chemical called chlorophyll is found in chloroplasts. It's what makes the plant cells look green, and it's where photosynthesis is carried out. Cells. So we know that there are three different structures that are unique to plant cells, and one of those, of course, is the cell wall. Plant cells have cell walls, animal cells don't. Cell walls are these thick, rigid, protective structures that surround the outside of the cell. It helps to give it support and shape. Plants don't have an endoskeleton, an internal skeleton, or an external skeleton, so these cell walls are important to help the cell and the plant itself stand up straight. The second structure we only find in plant cells are chloroplasts. That's because plants are producers. They're able to take energy from the sun, combine it with carbon dioxide and water, and create sugars, which is the food that all cells need. And so they have chloroplasts containing chlorophyll that do that. The third structure that we find in plant cells and not necessarily in animal cells are things called large central vacuoles. They're storage places inside of the cell that keep excess water and materials for the cell's later use. It's important for plant cells for a couple reasons. One reason is they need water for photosynthesis, so that water needs to always be there when the sunlight is out. The second thing is that it acts as kind of a supported balloon inside of the cell, helping to give it shape and structure. The last component that we want to cover are how we can think about a cell as, say, a factory or a school or as a city. Now, we read a story about how the cell is similar to a city. You guys did an activity related to how our cell works kind of like a school. We also spent a little bit of time talking about the analogy of a cell as a factory. So I'm going to go ahead and use this slide here and talk a little bit about how a cell might work like a factory. So we mentioned earlier today that the cell is kind of like a little protein making factory itself. That's essentially what cells do. Cells make proteins, and those proteins then can be used to build new cells or to replace damaged parts of a present cell, or even to send messages to other cells. And so if we think about the cell as a factory, then we can start to get a better sense of how cells function. So let's imagine the cell is like a factory. So we'll start with the outside. A factory is a building. It's got to have walls. Those walls provide structure and support, protect the things that are inside, keep things that are outside from getting in. So it's very similar to a cell wall. The outside structure of a factory is just like the cell wall. You take away the outside walls and the factory is going to collapse. If I take away the cell walls, the cell might very well collapse. Inside of that cell wall, there's a cell membrane, kind of a porous membrane that allows some things in and some things out. That might function like the doors in a factory. Or like the, if there's a loading dock, an area where trucks can back up, that might work like a cell membrane as well. Cell membranes control what comes into and out of the cell. Now, if a factory is a place that makes things and a cell is a protein making factory, then the parts of the factory that actually make the proteins would be the ribosome. So the ribosomes make proteins inside of the cell, and if we think about a factory, that might be the workers. If it's an assembly plant where workers are literally assembling things like an iPhone, then the workers would be the ribosome. If it was a factory where there were machines that were pressing out parts, then those machines might be the ribosomes. Now, what tells the ribosomes what to make and when to make it? That's the nucleus. And so in a factory analogy, the thing that tells the workers what to make or tells the machines what to do might be the boss in the office. And inside of that office, there might be books or manuals telling the boss how to make the different parts, in the same way that in the nucleus is the DNA that tells the cell what to do and how to do it. So whoever's running the factory, whoever's telling the factory what to make and when to make it, that's just like the nucleus. Now, the cytoplasm is that jelly-like stuff that's inside of a cell and contains the organelles. That would be all of the space within the cell wall or within the factory walls. And so anything inside of the factory itself would be part of the cytoplasm. Vacuoles store important materials for use in the cell. And so in this cell factory analogy, any storeroom that would have extra materials waiting to be used would be like the vacuole. Cytoskeletons are internal structures inside of the cell that help to give it shape and support. So if you're walking around inside of a factory and you see steel beams or girders holding up that structure, that would be just like the cytoskeleton. Now, factories need energy. Cells need energy. Where do they get them? Well, for a cell, it gets its energy from the mitochondria, which turns sugar into ATP, which all parts of the cell can use. In the same way, a factory might run on electricity. And so whatever units are bringing electricity into the building, that might be considered the mitochondria. Or perhaps it's got a generator that's out there that's generating the electricity. That would be the mitochondria. Or maybe it's a steam-driven factory. Whatever unit's making the steam, that would be the mitochondria. So whatever's supplying the energy to run the factory, that would be the mitochondria. Now we know that once proteins are produced inside of a cell, they need to be packaged and prepared for delivery to other places, either inside or outside of the cell. In the same way that in a factory, you need to have something that's going to take those products that have been produced and put them into boxes and get them ready for delivery. And that would be what the Golgi bodies or the Golgi apparatus would do. The Golgi apparatus inside of a cell packages proteins and gets them ready for delivery. And inside of a cell, the packaging department would do that same thing. Now, things need to get moved around inside of a cell as well as things need to get moved around inside of a factory. Inside of the cell, that's often done by the endoplasmic reticulum, which are folded membranes that can move proteins from place to place. Inside of a factory, that might be like the conveyor belts that move things from one part of the factory to the other. We have chloroplasts in plant cells. Chloroplasts are special structures that convert sunlight into usable energy. So imagine this is a modern factory and they're trying to be energy efficient. They may very well have solar panels on the roof. Solar panels that take energy from the sun and turn it into electricity so that the cell can use it. That would be analogous to the chloroplasts themselves. Oftentimes you have things that are created that are defective or worn out, or as a process of making things in the factory, things get messy and they have to be cleaned up. And so you have custodians, janitors, you have repair people that are inside of the factory cleaning up, fixing things, replacing things, breaking things down that need to be gotten rid of. The lysosome inside of a cell does that same thing. Lysosomes are like the recyclers of a cell, breaking things down so it can be reused later on. In the same way that when we recycle something, we turn it into something new, oftentimes the cell will take what the lysosome has broken down and turn it into new structures. So we see in this analogy how a cell is very much like a factory. The nucleus is running the show, telling the ribosomes what to make and when to make it. Once they're made, the Golgi bodies can kind of package it up and get it ready for delivery. The endoplasmic reticulum is moving materials around. It's all powered by the mitochondria, which is supplying energy for the cell. And this is happening within a structure surrounded by a cell membrane, and if it's a plant, a cell wall with the cytoplasm inside, the cytoskeleton supplying internal structure for it, all powered by the mitochondria, and in some cases, if you're a plant, powered by the chloroplasts.